Hey, it's me, TB, and today I'm going to be talking about books by Indigenous authors and doing my best to recommend them to you. And I don't think this encompasses every book that I've read by an Indigenous author. If you want all of them, you can just go to my GoodReads, which is linked down below, along with all of my other social media, and there you go. And I will have links to all or most of these books linked down below, so if you want them, you can go buy them. So there you go. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get the two most talked about books out of the way, so we can get to the more niche recommendations afterwards, First up is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones has been writing since 2001, and he has a massive backlist, so if you like this, he has at least 10 more books to go read too. So there you go. A quick summary of this is that after a group of hunters kills this elk, and from there on, this the entity of this elk start hunting them down and killing them off one by one. This is a horror novel, so lots of murder in this, and I think I give this 4 out of 5 stars. It probably is a 5, but when I read this, I was sick and nauseous, so I don't remember anything about it. So yeah, and the author of this, I'm pretty sure, is Blackfeet. Next up is Black Sun by Rebecca Brownhorse. A quick summary of this is a fantasy series that takes place in a world inspired by pre-Columbian Americas. Primarily, we're following our main characters, Serapio and Ziala, as they're basically setting out to the main city of this world, because Serapio has to be there by a certain date, and her other POV is Narampa, who is basically the head priestess of this religion, and she has to deal with there being outbreaks of violence among the various groups of people that live in the city, as well as her past that she cannot really escape from, because there's still bad people in her past, and that's trying to basically fuck up her life. And there is a fourth POV, but I don't feel like mentioning it because he talks twice, and he doesn't do a lot in either story, so who cares about him? If you want giant crows, magic, a bisexual lead, I think, then here you go. And one of the main side characters does use neopronouns. I don't remember which ones, but there are neopronouns being used in this. So there you go. Now for the more niche stuff you don't see everywhere on BookTube right now. So first up is a series that I talk about all the fucking time, but too bad so sad, you're getting it again. And that is the Mighty Muskrats series by Michael Hutchinson. And these are basically following a group of First Nations kids in Canada as they're basically solving mysteries. This is a middle grade series, but see, I give them both either 4 or 5 stars, so obviously I think they're very good. And the third book in the series is coming out in 2021, I think March. So far the series has talked about complicated issues that involve First Nations people without getting too dark into it, because it is very dark history, but these books do talk about some the bad things without getting into the very dark past of it. So for instance, book 1 deals with an archaeologist that goes missing on the Windy Lake First Nation, and one of I think they go ask the elders I think where he was last spotted, I think, and the elders kind of talk about how they sent him the opposite direction of where their dead are kept, because they didn't want him fucking with their dead, and is kind of talked about how archaeologists aren't known for their positive connections with Indigenous communities. And one of the subplots in this involves one of their cousins who is an environmental activist, I think. There's more specific word for it, but it's totally slipping my mind right now. And it's about her, she's kind of chained herself to this part of the building, and she basically wants this building, this corporation, to get off their nation, because I think they're either polluting the water, polluting some aspect of the environment. And yeah, that's also talked about in the second one. This follows them as they are going to the big city for, I think, an exhibition of some kind. And before they go there, their grandpa talks to them about the fact that he has a sister that went missing, and so they decide to basically go to the big city and use the city's resources to try and track down their missing auntie. So this one kind of deals with how Indigenous children were taken from their parents during the 60s and 70s in Canada and the US and Australia. Just kind of get into the how complicated that can be, and what the effects of that were, but still remains a middle grade level grasping of it. So you do learn a lot, but it isn't you're getting the dark nitty gritty about it, And so far these have gotten better as the series has progressed. So I do think that the second book is better, just because the writing has improved, and that it is just a little bit bigger too, so there's more room for growth, And the author of these is Cree, I think. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the other middle grade novel on this list, and that is Two Roads by Joseph Bruchac. And this is following our main character Cal and his father as they are hobos living out in the US during the 1930s, you know, the Great Depression. And Cal's dad basically sends him off to a school for Indigenous children, and he's told that they are both Creek. And before this, Cal just thought he was white. Of course, this is like a big revelation to him. In this book, kind of talks about residential schools. The author talks about this in his like author's note, that a book he read kind of like inspired him to talk about this. And basically like the book he talked about was about how during this period of time when kids were being sent to these schools, while they were separated from their family, it was also like a location where they could like kind of like teach language behind the teachers' backs, and it was giving these kids like a sense of community, because like these are like the only times a lot of them have ever met another kid that was Native American. So it gave them like a sense of like community almost. And just like it's also part of the book where it is kind of like explained that Cal's dad kind of says that his time during school was like really bad, but also he made some like the best friends he ever had. And because he went to that school, he is like fluent in Creek now, because like before he went and he knew nothing, but he leaves and he's like fluent. And it doesn't like shy away from like the negative side, but it doesn't like focus too heavily on them. Like it is mentioned how shitty and awful they are, but doesn't like focus in on like the atrocities that went on. This is editing to be, and I forgot to say this in the video, but Joseph Bruchac is Abenaki. The last middle grade on this list, I think, is Rain Is Not My Indian Name. And this is like a short middle grade novel, and basically this follows our main character, Cassidy, as she becomes involved with her aunt's Indian camp that has appeared in their mostly white Midwestern town. She has to decide whether or not she wants to become like fully involved with this camp or not, because it is like a source of controversy. And since it is so short, I don't want to go more in depth about it. But yeah, I think I ended up giving this like 3 stars, maybe, or like 3.5, somewhere around there. I did like it. And obviously this is like meant for like middle school kids and not me. So obviously they would like it more than I liked it. And the author is Muskogee Creek. Next is The Interrogation of Ashayla Wolf by Amblin Quay Molina, and this was released during the dystopia craze of the early 2010s. And I'm telling you that so you kind of like know what you're getting yourself into. It does start off very like dystopia, like token dystopia, but it does kind of like go through its own thing throughout even this book. But like by the end of the trilogy, it is like more like a like dystopia with like heavy fantasy elements, you know? So in this book, this is like really complicated, so excuse me. Basically in this world, humans had fucked the environment so hard that this event called the Reckoning happened, and the world was basically almost destroyed itself. And through the work of a guy named Hoffman, humans were able to kind of like restabilize themselves and had technology to kind of like make sure they don't overtax the environment ever again. However, by that time, the continental plates had shifted. You know, plant life had changed, animals had vanished and reappeared. It was a whole thing. So, when the story picks back off, we are following the interrogation of Ashayla Wolf as she is being taken hostage and was betrayed by a member of her tribe. And basically, they're trying to get any information out of her regarding other illegals like her. And illegals in this world are basically people that have powers. For instance, Ashayla, her power is very like complicated, but basically she can like go to sleep and she might end up dream walking, like sleepwalking, I think. Basically anything she does in her dream is like reflected in the world around her. So like for instance, in one of the books, she is like confined in a cell, and so she like sleepwalks her way into like punching out of the cell. Because it is like a dream, she has the power to basically break down the wall with like a single punch. There are like other more like trippy events, but overall they are mostly just her using her dreams to break shit. This series is like heavy on the plot twists. I think both this book and the second book and third book have like really big like midpoint twists that got me gasping every time. So yeah, and the third book in this trilogy made me cry like 5 times. So there we go. I really like this series. I don't know why it wasn't talked about when it first released, because it was like really good. It does do it like a different thing with the dystopia formula than what the other books of that era did, but it was like really slept on, so I'm here to talk about it again. And the author of this is a Palki woman. I think this is the only book by an Aboriginal Australian that I have on this list. So there you go. Actually, that's a lie. I have another one coming up after this. The other book by an Aboriginal Australian author is The Yield by Tara Jane Winch. This one was definitely like one of the more like surprising books that I read this year, because I knew it was gonna be good because it had won like multiple awards, but I really liked it. And this book is told through like 3 POVs. One of them is our main character, August, who has lived away from Australia for like many years, and she is moving back because her poppy has just died. And when she returns home, she finds out that the land her family has lived on for decades is being like taken away, because there have been copper mines found like close to it, and like her POV like follows her trying to find a way to save her family's land, because I think that they're trying to find something historically important so they can like say that this land has historical significance and therefore you can't take it away. And the second POV is following her poppy and him writing his dictionary because he was trying to conserve the language that he had growing up and the people around him. So he wrote this dictionary of words, and you basically follow him writing this dictionary. So like his POVs are like dictionary entries, so like you get a word followed by what it means, and then that kind of tells an overall story throughout Poppy's life, basically. I know it feels like very like weird and that it would feel very like not exciting, but it is done like very well and was fucking really good. I think I probably liked his POV the most out of the three, just from like what a unique concept it is, you know? And the third one is told through the letters of a missionary that was sent in the area in like the late 19th, early 20th century, and him like trying to help the Aboriginal community and like how hard that was, like how it's basically impossible because the local white people were just absolutely shitty, and just like how what happened in the past is kind of like affecting the future, really. I guess like the present, I guess would be like a better word to use, because it was like hard-hitting themes without being like too heavy, I guess. And Tara Jean Winch is a Wiradjuri. Next is Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. I read this like just a few months ago and I cried, so of course I want to read it again so I can annotate and cry again. And this is following Saul Indian Horse from his childhood to his adulthood, where he starts off living out in the woods with his family members, and eventually they kind of all leave for a variety of reasons, and he is sent to a boarding school where just a lot of like bad shit happens. But at that boarding school, he basically falls in love with hockey, and through hockey he is kind of able to do something else with his life. So trigger warnings, basically anything bad that happened at a residential school or a boarding school that happened in this book. There is like suicide, there are mentions of like molestation, there's a lot of mentions of molestation. So, you know, just go into this expecting like lots of like heavy topics being discussed, because it does happen a lot. And I would say this book ends on like a happy note, like a happy-esque note, but there are some like major things that happen that kind of involve trauma. So go into this expecting like a very like heavy read. And I will go ahead and also tell you that while hockey is in this, I know nothing, and I wasn't confused about like the hockey terms or anything, so don't be afraid of that, I guess. And Richard Wagamese is an Ojibwe writer. So next up, I think, is one of the only nonfiction things on this list. I don't know anymore, it's been a long day. That is From the Deep Woods to Civilization by Charles A. Eastman. And Eastman wrote a variety of books following like different parts of his life, and this one is following, I think, his like teenage years up into his adulthood, or his like early adulthood, I guess, as the title says. It's basically following Eastman as he, you know, is adapting to living of the society of the United States. And basically it follows him as he gets his like college degrees and all of that. And through this, we also learn that he was on Pine Ridge whenever the Wounded Knee Massacre happened. He kind of describes what he saw and like the after effects of that as it happened. And Eastman was Santee, Dakota. Next is American Indian Stories by Zitlasa. I already know that I didn't pronounce that right, and I haven't found a like pronunciation video or like anything that pronounces her name correctly. So I'm so sorry to her and her family. A collection of poetry and stories by the author. And I think some of these are more biographical. Other ones are just like works of fiction. What I think is like most interesting about this, and same thing with Eastman, is that this was published, and I think like in 1926. At least some of the writings in this were like first written, and I know for a fact she at least had like some writing published in the early 20th century, around like 1910 to like 1920-ish, that time period. So like if you want to learn more about what the writing landscape was like during that time period, here you go. Obviously this is like a collection of like short stories, so I don't really have like a lot to like tell you, I guess. I remember liking her poetry and her short stories, so there you go. And that's all I really have to say, I guess. And the author was Yankton, Dakota. And then finally is Winter Counts by David Heska Wombly-Waden. And so this is a thriller following Virgil Leontors, who is a enforcer on Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And basically he is there so whenever people aren't punished for their crimes, or crimes that the federal government won't prosecute, He's there to basically beat the fuck out of people as punishment. And he gets roped into having to stop the flow of drugs on his reservation. And through that, his nephew is being accused as being part of the problem. So he has to figure out who is bringing the drugs and kind of like to prove his nephew's innocence. And through this, one of his exes is also involved, and you know, stuff happens from there because their breakup wasn't like a good breakup, you know. So that's a thing. And I'm pretty sure this was like one of my favorite reads from 2020. I'm pretty sure, because I really liked it. I didn't read this physically. I read this via audiobook, so I don't know how that skewed how I feel. But yeah, as for like a thriller / mystery, here's the thing. Even though it is a thriller, I liked it enough that I want to reread it. So that by default makes it like better than most thrillers for me. So there we go. And I didn't see any of like the major twists coming, so that's also good. And listen, even though it isn't like a romance, I was shipping 2 characters very much. So I'm pretty sure we might be getting a sequel. And like this is one of the books that I wanted to keep reading. Like I remember finishing it and I immediately wanted to like read it again. Like I was actually like sad that it was like over and done with. So yeah, it was really fucking good. If you like thrillers and like crime stuff, here we go. And I'm pretty sure this is on the GoodReads list along with The Only Good Indians. And I'm pretty sure Black Swan was too. And those are my recommendations. As always, like, subscribe, share, all that shit. I have links to all the books down below. And I think that is all for me for today. I shall see you next week.